"Get out of here! I didn't invite you!" She screamed, her voice cutting through the laughter like broken glass. I froze, still holding the serving spoon I'd used since 5 in the morning to cook every dish for her birthday. The guests went silent, forks mid-air, watching the old woman she'd just humiliated. Me, the smell of roasted chicken and cinnamon pie turned sour in my throat. I built this house. I paid for every brick. Yet that night, in front of 20 strangers, my own daughter-in-law treated me like an intruder. So I stood up, wiped my hands on the apron that still smelled of home, walked to the door, and did something that made every guest in that room gasp in fear. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Sometimes just knowing someone is listening makes the pain a little lighter. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Vesper Calloway. I'm 66 years old, and what happened in my own house that night changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and dignity. If my story touches your heart, please subscribe to this channel. It helps me keep sharing these true pieces of my life with you. Get out of here, I didn't invite you. Her voice ripped through the room, sharp as broken glass. For a second, I thought she was joking. My hand froze mid-air, still holding the serving spoon I'd used since 5 in the morning to stir the green chili stew. But when I looked up and saw Sloane's eyes cold, annoyed, almost enjoying it, I knew she meant it. Every guest turned toward me, a sea of polite smiles stiffening into discomfort. I stood in my own dining room, surrounded by strangers, while my daughter-in-law made me feel like the help. The house smelled of roasted peppers and meringue pie, but all I could taste was humiliation. I looked at my son Graham standing beside her, his head lowered. Not a word, not even a look, just silence. The sound of the clock on the wall filled the gap between us, ticking louder than the laughter that had died. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Then something inside me, a quiet part that had been stepped on too many times, stood up first. I put the spoon down, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked toward the garage door. Sloane's friends whispered forks clinking nervously. I reached the breaker box, pulled the main lever down. The lights went out in one instant. The room fell into an eerie half-darkness, only the dim emergency bulbs glowing from the ceiling. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed awkwardly. And then I spoke, calm, steady. "This house belongs to me. The party's over. Anyone who stays now will be trespassing." I took my phone, pressed play on a short recording I'd kept for months, Sloane's voice mocking me to her friends. "She's just an old woman who can't let go of a house built before Wi-Fi." The sound filled the silence. Every guest turned toward her. Her face went pale. "You're losing your mind," she snapped. "You should be in assisted living." I looked straight at her. Maybe, but I still pay the mortgage, and that means I still choose who eats at my table. Her mouth opened, but no words came. People began standing, whispering awkwardly, grabbing their coats. Graham tried to stop them, but the embarrassment was too thick in the air. Within minutes, the laughter, the glasses, the music all gone. Just the smell of burnt wax and the hum of the fridge left behind. When the door finally closed, I turned on one light, the one above the stove, and looked around. The walls that used to glow a soft yellow were now painted Sloane's favorite gray. My husband's old rocking chair sat abandoned in the garage. My home didn't feel like mine anymore. I opened my laptop and revoked her access to the smart home system, the locks, the lights, the thermostat, all of it. I didn't say a word when Graham walked past me, ashamed. I just looked at him and asked quietly, "Do you even know whose name is on this deed?" He didn't answer. When he left the room, I stood in the half-light, listening to the heater click on. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something sharper clarity. I'd spent years trying to keep peace. That night, I learned peace doesn't live in silence. It lives in truth, no matter how much noise it makes. Outside, snow began to fall, tapping softly against the kitchen window. I stared at it for a long time, remembering another winter, another beginning. It was 1985 when Eamon first showed me the spot on the hill. "Look, Vess." He set his breath, fogging in the cold air. "This is where our life will stand." He knelt on the frozen dirt and sketched the shape of a small wooden house with the back of his pencil. We were young, broke, and foolish enough to believe that love could outlast anything, even debt and snowstorms. But we built it anyway, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. Every wall of this place carries our fingerprints under the paint. Eamon worked construction. I ran laundry for the local motel and cooked for neighbors to save up for roofing shingles. When Graham was born, the kitchen wasn't even finished. We used a camp stove and dreamed of yellow cabinets. That color meant warmth to me. It meant sunlight even when the mountain sky turned gray. But life doesn't stop for dreams. The day the scaffolding collapsed at the Denver site, they told me Eamon was gone before he hit the ground. I remember the smell of motor oil on his jacket when they gave it back to me. Insurance barely covered the funeral. The bank wanted the house. Everyone told me to sell, move closer to town, start over. But one night, Graham came down with a fever so high he couldn't breathe. I called every number I had until Ruthie Sandoval, our neighbor and a nurse back then, ran through the snow to help. She stayed until dawn. When Graham finally opened his eyes, I looked around that little unfinished room and swore, "I will never leave this house. I will finish what we started." So I did. I painted the kitchen yellow, laid down the wooden floorboards myself, paid off every cent of the loan 5 years early. The deed, Vesper Calloway sole owner, sits framed in my bedroom drawer to this day. There are pieces of Eamon everywhere here. The rocking chair he made for me when I was pregnant, the clock that still ticks too fast, and a sealed letter hidden in the bottom drawer of that same chair, a letter I've never had the courage to open. He wrote it the week before the accident. Sometimes I think it's waiting for the day I'm strong enough to know what it says. People see a house as wood and nails. I see the years I kept it standing, the winters I shoveled alone, the nights I took double shifts so Graham could go to college, the meals I cooked for neighbors when I barely had food for myself. This house isn't a building. It's the proof I survived. When Sloan moved in years later, she called it outdated. She painted over the yellow. She changed the light fixtures and moved the chair to the garage because it didn't match her aesthetic. I didn't argue then. I thought family meant adapting. But now sitting here in the quiet after that night, I see what I was blind to before every inch she changed wasn't just decoration. It was erasure. And maybe that's why I couldn't walk away tonight. Because the woman she tried to erase me finally remembered why she built these walls in the first place. For safety. For love. For dignity. The snow outside thickened, glowing white under the porch light. I reached into the drawer where the deed rested, touched the edge of the paper, and whispered into the dark, "I'm still here, Eamon. And so is the house." They moved in during late summer, the kind that smells like hot pine and rain on asphalt. "Just 6 months," Sloan said, cheerfully on the porch, fingers looped through Graham's arm. "We'll save for a deposit." I handed them the master bedroom because that's what mothers do when their sons say they're tired of scraping by. I told myself, generosity is temporary. It wasn't. The first week, she swapped my curtains for slate gray panels and called it light control. By the second, the little altar of photos I kept for Eamon, our wedding. Graham on his first bike was replaced by a floating bookshelf with 3 identical candles that never burned. Minimal, she said, like it was a prayer. The rocking chair Eamon carved for me when I was pregnant disappeared to the garage to make space. Fall came, and with it, her Thursday gatherings. Co-workers I didn't know arrived with loud voices and clean sneakers, their laughter echoing off the new hard edges she'd installed in my soft house. I cooked, I refilled, I wiped spills with the speed of a diner waitress. When one woman asked Sloan who I was, Sloan smiled and said, "She helps around here." She said it like a convenience, like a feature. I swallowed the sting and went back to the stove. Later in the hallway, I heard her telling someone I'd been forgetting things lately, that I repeated stories. She made it sound gentle, concerned. It wasn't. It was a label she was hanging around my neck. Winter turned the road to Raven Creek into a ribbon of ice. I shoveled before sunrise while they slept in and posted about cozy mornings. Her parents, Phyllis and Warren, arrived for a few days that bled into weeks. They took the guest room, then my sewing room, then suggested I use the laundry nook since I was up early anyway. I dragged a thin mattress between the washer and the mop bucket and told myself it was only until spring. Graham put his hands on my shoulders and said, "I've got the utilities, Mom. We're covering things. Can you just be flexible?" As if flexibility were a different word for vanishing. The kitchen changed in slow increments, almost kindly. Yellow gave way to primer, then a tasteful gray she saw on a show. The warm bulbs were swapped for bright white that made my hands look older. A glossy island arrived where the kitchen table used to be the one with the scratches from Graham's homework pencils. Music started coming from the smart speakers instead of the old radio. I tried to ask where my radio went, and Sloan answered a different question. At night, I sat in the laundry nook listening to the pipes click, wondering how a person can be surrounded by family and still feel like a tenant. I told myself not to make trouble, not to be the mother-in-law in the stories. So I smiled and took pictures of the snow on the fence and cooked the dishes people asked for. But questions built like drifts. When did I stop choosing what hangs on my walls? When did I stop sitting at my own table? One afternoon, while I was sorting linens, I heard Sloan in the hallway, voice clipped and amused on speakerphone. "We don't pay for a thing. Rent, utilities, nothing," she said. "I just put up with the old woman. It's the cost of living free." I sat perfectly still until the call ended. The house hummed. I felt something in me lock into place. That night, I opened the Notes app on my phone and taught myself how to record. The recordings were ordinary at first, her telling a guest to put the wine glasses in a different cabinet because I confused systems, her reminding Graham to keep me out of the big decisions. Nothing you could hold in your hand, everything you could feel. Then came the sentence that snapped the last thread. During a minor argument about the curtains, she laughed and said, "This house would sell so well. Honestly, that's the only smart move." I nodded like I hadn't heard, stepped away like I was going for tea, and drove to Ruthie's with a manila envelope under my coat. Ruthie's living room smelled like cinnamon and orange peel. I asked her to put the envelope, my deed, my insurance, the last photo of Eamon and me on closing day, into her small safe. On the way home, I tucked a flash drive into the hollow under the rocking chair's seat. The chair, Sloan said, didn't match anything. It matched me. That was enough. Spring melted the banks and the road turned to mud. Sloan reorganized the pantry and changed the passwords to the smart home, then handed me a printed list, like a teacher. It didn't work. When I tried the thermostat, the app told me I was unauthorized. I waited until the house was empty, pulled up the original admin email I'd used the day I bought the first bulb, and took everything back. I changed every password and wrote them down in a notebook Ruthie gave me, the kind with a cloth cover and elastic band. At dinner, Sloan complained the front camera wouldn't load on her phone. I smiled and said the Wi-Fi on the ridge is tricky. She didn't look up. Summer turned to another fall, then into the winter, where this all finally broke. I watched my neighbors change. The old ones waved less, as the new ones waved more. People who knew the history of my house stopped visiting because Sloan said drop-ins made her anxious. The mailbox filled with catalogs addressed to current resident. Some afternoons when the wind was just right, I could hear the high school marching band practicing in the valley, and it would lift my chest like a small hot air balloon. Then the garage door would rumble, and I would set my feet back on the ground. On the day her father's birthday invitation went out, the one with our address on it, and her name under host, I set the table with the same steady hands that built this life. Phyllis complimented the shine on the silverware and asked if I could keep to the kitchen so the flow felt right. Graham kissed my cheek and said, "It's just one night." I touched the edge of the counter, the place where the varnish had worn smooth from 20 years of bread dough, and told myself to make it through the evening. In the laundry nook later, with the dryer ticking, I clicked the little red dot on my phone and whispered today's date into the microphone. Snow was coming. I could smell it. The morning of Warren's birthday started before sunrise. I marinated the roast-peeled potatoes, folded napkins into tight fans. Sloan walked in at 10 with a clipboard and assigned stations like it was a catered event. "You can help in the back," she said, cutting a glance at my apron. "We're going for a certain look." By noon, their friends began to arrive, coats like small mountains along the entry bench. I could tell from the way they glanced at me that someone had already told a story about who I was. "She helps around here," Sloan repeated to a woman in a cranberry sweater, and the woman nodded like she understood the structure of this place. The kitchen, the heart of the house I built, felt like a showroom. The gray paint swallowed the heat of the oven. I plated canapes while the new lights made my knuckles look blue. As I wiped the counter, I heard Sloan's voice near the fridge, low and bright. She started talking to his photo again. She giggled to her friend. Like a full-on conversation. Dementia is real. The friend made that pained, sympathetic sound people make when they think they're being kind. I stood still and counted backward from 10. Graham was at the island pretending the olives were interesting. He didn't say a word. Guests toasted in the dining room. Warren thumped the table and told a long story that ended with applause. When I carried out the main course, Sloan introduced me without looking over. She helped with the food, she said, like I hadn't been on my feet since dawn. After the cake, Phyllis and Warren cornered me near the pantry and suggested in the soft tone reserved for scolding a child that I stay out of the kitchen for the rest of the night, because my moving around made things chaotic. I nodded once because if I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out. In the morning, the house smelled like frosting and stale perfume. I made coffee and went to hang a new calendar on the wall above the buffet, the spot where our wedding photo had hung for 20 years. The hook was empty. I checked the drawer. I checked the hall. It made the space feel heavy, Sloan said lightly when she saw me looking. "This is a new chapter." She patted my shoulder as if that explained the hole on the wall and the ache under my sternum. I set the calendar down and turned on my phone's recorder for the first time in front of her. My voice was steady. "You can take down my photos, but you can't take my name off the deed." She smiled quick and tight. "Papers get lost, Vesper. Do you even remember where you put them?" When she left the room, I went straight to the office cabinet and pulled out the file where I'd kept a copy since the day the bank stamped it. The sleeve was there, the paper inside. Different. A new printout in a font I had never used, my name spliced with Graham's initial and last name like a graphed V and G. Calloway. My mouth went dry. I walked into the hall, held it up to Graham. "What is this?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I was just trying to make an extra copy," he said. "Maybe I saved over something." He wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt the room tilt and right itself. I didn't argue. I took my coat, walked to Ruthie's through the slush, and asked her to open the little safe with the brass dial. Inside my document looked back at me the way it always had creased at the corner, my signature a little crooked, but mine alone. I pressed my palm over it and breathed until my hands stopped trembling. On my way out, Ruthie poured coffee into a travel mug and said, "You good?" I nodded. For now. That evening, the house was quiet. Sloan's friends had moved on to someone else's wine. The gray walls threw the last light of day back at themselves. I stood in the doorway and let my eyes travel across everything she'd changed. The radio was gone. The chair was in the garage. The wedding photo was missing. But the bones of the place still knew me. My fingerprints lived under the paint. My back had memorized the height of the counters. I opened the garage and ran my hand along the arm of the rocking chair, then reached under the seat and felt the flash drive where I'd left it. Still there. When Graham came in, he started with a weary mom, the kind of word that tries to be gentle and ends up thin. I held up the forged page and said, "This isn't a mistake. Someone typed this." He sighed and told me not to work myself up. He said stress wasn't good for me, that he'd talk to Sloan. I told him I didn't need him to talk to her. I needed him to tell me the truth. His silence answered for him. I went to bed in the laundry nook and listened to the pipes knock. Somewhere between the rinse cycle and the spin, I realized I had been waiting for permission to stand up in a house I built with my own hands. I didn't sleep. I watched the thin bar of porch light under the door and thought about the line she threw at me, "Papers get lost." In the morning, I brewed coffee, set the mug down, and wrote 3 things on a sticky note. Call the county office, call an attorney, bring the chair back inside. Then I peeled the note from the counter and stuck it to my chest, right where the ache was. The week after Warren's birthday felt like someone had cut the sound out of the house. Laughter was gone, replaced by the low hum of the heating vent and the faint creak of ice shifting on the roof. I woke up every morning in the laundry room where the single heater ticked like a metronome of survival. My slippers stuck slightly to the concrete floor, the air smelled like detergent and wet wool, and I started to forget what sunlight looked like through the kitchen window. They'd changed the password to the smart home system, the thermostat, the locks. When I asked, Sloan smiled and said it must have been a glitch. The next day, I couldn't turn on the living room lights or open the garage door without her phone. I wasn't allowed at meals anymore. "We're having guests," she'd say, or "We'll bring you something later." I learned to recognize the difference between footsteps that stopped by my door and the ones that didn't. I heard their dinners through the walls, glasses clinking, her laugh sharp, and practiced Graham's voice low and careful. It's strange how sound can bruise you. One night, the wind woke me up. It wasn't the soft kind, it was the kind that moaned through the siding, prying its way inside. I put on my sweater and went to check the back door. Snow had blown in a thin white line across the kitchen floor. The door was wide open. My hands shook as I pushed it shut. In the morning, when I mentioned it, Sloan raised an eyebrow. "You probably forgot to latch it," she said, her tone dripping concern. "It happens." That word "happens" cut deeper than a knife. By noon, the snow was waist-high outside, swallowing the porch steps. I stood by the window, watching flakes drift down like pieces of erased time. Then a knock came. When I opened the door, Ruthie Sandoval stood there, wrapped in a green parka, holding a grocery bag. "You look frozen," she said. "Why is it so dark in here?" She brushed past me like she owned the place, setting down bread soup and a thermos of coffee. Her eyes caught on the folded cot in the corner. "Don't tell me this is where you sleep now." I didn't answer. She looked at me longer, then said softly, "Vez, this isn't normal." I sat down and told her everything. About the passwords, the missing deed, the empty wall where my wedding photo used to hang. Ruthie listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, steam clouding her glasses. When I finished, she said one sentence that changed everything. "This is abuse, honey. Not the kind that leaves bruises, the kind that makes you forget you're real." She told me she'd seen it before. Years ago, she'd taken her own son to court when he tried to sell her property behind her back. You think it's just them being selfish, but it's power, and they won't stop until you draw the line. She scribbled a name on the back of a receipt, Miguel Chavez, attorney Santa Fe. Call him. First thing Monday. You've still got time to fight. Something in her voice, calm, solid, made me believe her. I poured us both tea and asked how she knew there was still time. She leaned in, lowered her voice. "A friend of mine works at the county office. She saw a file come through last week. Someone's trying to add a co-owner to your property." My breath caught. That can't be processed without my signature. She gave me a long look. "Can it?" That night after she left, I sat by the small heater in the laundry room and dialed the number for the county clerk's office. The woman on the other end confirmed there was an application pending an unsigned form under review, marked VNG Calloway. My own name cut in half and rearranged. I thanked her and hung up. The snow outside glowed blue under the porch light. I realized then that I could freeze in this house with every right to it and still disappear. I packed every document. I still had tax forms, insurance. Eamon's blueprint sketch into a folder, wrapped it in a towel, and trudged through the snow to Ruthie's house, my boots filled with ice water halfway down the hill. She met me at the door, shaking her head, but opened her safe without a word. I placed the folder inside, exhaled, and felt a strange warmth crawl back into my chest. On my walk home, the snow fell harder, a white curtain erasing my footprints as fast as I made them. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I felt awake. By the time I reached my porch, I'd made up my mind. I would reclaim my name, my deed, my dignity, not through shouting, but through proof. The heater in the laundry room sputtered as I crawled back under the blanket. Outside, the storm howled like something cleansing the valley. I thought about Ruthie's words, better alone with dignity than under a roof of shame, and whispered them into the dark as if saying them could keep me warm. By morning, the house was buried in white. I made coffee, sat by the window, and stared at the snow piling higher against the glass. It looked like a blank page. I was ready to start writing again. Monday came clear and brittle. The snow had stopped the air so sharp it felt like it could cut glass. I drove to Santa Fe with my folder of copies and a thermos of coffee, Ruthie's scarf wrapped twice around my neck. Miguel Chavez's office was on the second floor of a small brick building, the kind that smells of paper and dust and trust. He listened, took notes, and within an hour handed me a document embossed with the state seal. This, he said, is your certified proof of ownership. Keep it close. And if anyone tries to alter your records again, they'll be facing a criminal charge. I felt my lungs open for the first time in months. By dusk, I was back in Raven Creek. The house looked still from the driveway lights glowing cold behind the gray curtains. I sat for a while and let the quiet settle. Then I carried the papers inside and placed them on the kitchen counter, my counter, before pulling the old rocking chair back into the living room. When the legs hit the hardwood, a sound echoed through the house like a declaration. The front door opened behind me. "Colton's here," Sloan called. "We're getting an estimate for the listing." She stopped short when she saw me sitting in the chair. A man in a wool coat stepped in, holding a leather folder. "Evening," he said, polite, not knowing he'd walked into a minefield. "Is the owner present?" "She is," I said. "You're looking at her." Sloan laughed brittle as the frost outside. "We co-own, actually. She forgets sometimes." I picked up the certificate from the counter and handed it to him. "This house has one owner. My husband and I built it in 1985. He's gone, but I'm still here." Colton scanned the paper, his brows rising. Sloan stepped closer, voice sharp. "That's outdated. There's a new application pending. We've just been updating the file. Then perhaps you'd like to confirm that I said," unlocking my phone and dialing Miguel's number. The call went to video, and within seconds his face appeared framed by stacks of case files. "Mrs. Calloway," he greeted me. "Do you need me to clarify the record?" "Yes," I said, eyes on Sloan. "Please tell them who legally owns this property." He adjusted his glasses. "The records show no legal co-owner or amendments. Any attempt to file under another name would constitute fraud." Colton stepped back, closing his folder. "I think I'll reschedule our meeting," he murmured, retreating toward the door. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the fridge. Sloan turned on me, her voice shaking. "You're destroying your own family." "We were just trying to help manage things." "Manage," I said quietly. "You locked me out of my own lights." Graham entered from the hallway, face pale. "Can we please stop this, Mom? You're tired." I cut him off. "Tired isn't the same as crazy. You signed something, didn't you?" His eyes flickered. That was all the answer I needed. "What did she tell you, Graham?" "That it was a tax form, a maintenance request." He stared at the floor. "She said it was just paperwork." I didn't know. "No," I said, my voice low. "You didn't want to know." Sloan stepped forward. "I did what I had to do. He deserves better than being trapped here with your ghosts." I turned, opened the phone's recorder, and played her voice back to her, the clip I'd saved months ago. Her laughter filled the room. I just need to tolerate her a little longer. Once the house sells, we'll be free." The color drained from her face. Graham's head snapped up. "You said that he whispered." She didn't answer. I stood my hand steady now. "You called me crazy, but I was paying attention. You erased my walls, my photo, my name. But you forgot one thing: I built this place with my own hands, and I don't forget the sound of my own hammer." Sloane's eyes flashed, then dimmed. The fight left her voice. "You'll regret this," she said. "You'll end up alone." "Maybe," I replied, "but at least I'll be alone in my own home." She brushed past Graham and stormed toward the stairs. The slam of the bedroom door echoed like a gavel. Graham stayed still, eyes glassy. He looked at me the way a boy looks at the mother he's been told to doubt. I sat back in the rocking chair. "Do you hear that?" I asked softly. He frowned. "What?" "The house," I said. "It's breathing again." Outside, snow began to fall gentle this time, tracing the windows like forgiveness. I closed my eyes, the sound of Eamon's old clock steady in the quiet. For the first time in years, the rhythm felt right again, the steady pulse of a life reclaimed. 3 nights after the broker fled, I repainted the kitchen the color of morning. By the time the sun went down, the walls glowed like butter, and the whole house smelled of lemon soap and second chances. I set 3 things on the table: my certified deed, a signed notice, warning against unauthorized entry, and a copy of the protective services agreement Miguel had prepared. Then I made tea and waited. Snow pressed against the windows. The clock Eamon hung years ago kept perfect time. The door opened after 10. Sloane stepped in first coat, glossy with sleet. Graham behind her with that careful face he wears when he wants to be neutral. She stopped short at the doorway to the kitchen. "What did you do?" she asked, staring at the yellow walls. "I brought the house back to itself," I said. I slid the papers forward. "This is simple. This house has one owner. You have 72 hours to move out." Sloane laughed, a dry, skipping sound. "You don't mean that. It isn't about meaning it," I answered. "It's about time." Graham pulled out a chair but didn't sit. "Mom, can we talk like family? This is getting out of hand." I looked at him, really looked, and the years layered there. Skinned knees. Graduation, the first box he carried over this threshold. "Do you remember who bought the first brick for this place?" I asked. He looked down. "You did." Sloane's palm hit the table. "Enough with the martyr act. You're not well. Everyone knows it." I picked up my phone and pressed play. Her voice spilled into the yellow light, clear as church bells, the jokes about the old woman, the plan to endure me until the sale. The little victory she promised herself. When the recording ended, the only sound left was the heater breathing. I pointed to the doorway. "I don't need an audience. I need quiet. If that frightens you, you should go." I walked to the front door and opened it. Cold air rolled over the floor, lifting the curtains, making the fresh paint shiver. Snowlight spilled across the yellow walls, bright as a sheet. Sloane looked at Graham. "Say something." He didn't. He picked up the suitcase she'd left by the stairs and stood there a long time, the handle creaking in his hand. Then he nodded once, a small, tired motion, and followed her out. The latch clicked. Their car grumbled down Raven Creek Road until the sound thinned and disappeared. I shut the door and stood in the hush that followed the kind of quiet that isn't empty but full. I made another cup of tea and carried it to the rocking chair I'd moved back into the living room. The seat was cold at first, then warm under me. I reached beneath it and pulled out the envelope I had avoided for years. Eamon's handwriting slanted across the front. I opened it. His words were simple. "If the day ever comes when you must choose between love and peace, choose peace. Only peace can keep love alive." A photograph slid out behind the letter. Eamon and little Graham in the yard, snow up to their boots, both of them laughing like it would always be that way. I cried then, not the angry kind, the kind that rinses. My phone rang on the table. The number was from the county office. The clerk's voice was brisk kind. She was calling to confirm cancellation. The unauthorized filing on my property had been voided and flagged. "Your record stands as is," she said. "You're all set." I thanked her, hung up, and pressed the old photo to my chest. Outside, the storm thickened. Inside, the house held steady. I set Eamon's letter by the clock and whispered, I chose. Spring came late to Raven Creek, but when it arrived everywhere at once. Meltwater ran under the fence, and the yard woke up in a rash of yellow daisies, Eamon's favorite. I opened the windows and started Callaway Kitchen for Kids on Saturday's 3 neighborhood children, chopping herbs on low stools, while I taught them to fold tortillas by feel. Laughter fit the room again. Ruthie slipped in one morning with a loaf of sweet bread and watched the scene like a woman remembering music. "Your house has its voice back," she said. "It was never gone," I told her. I was. In the afternoon, after the children left with warm paper packets for their mothers, a soft knock found the doorframe. Graham stood there holding a bundled infant and a diaper bag that looked heavier than his arm. His eyes were rimmed red. "She left," he said, voice breaking on the pronoun. "2 months ago, I filed. It's final." He shifted the baby and swallowed. "I'm sorry, Mom. For all of it." I didn't rush forward. I filled the kettle, set out 2 cups, and said, "You look cold." We sat at the table while the baby made small animal noises against his shoulder. He kissed her hair. "Her name is Alara," he said. "After you." It landed in me like a bell. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "She's beautiful," I managed. "Let me see her." He laid her in my arms, and she blinked up solemn as moonlight. Her tiny hand opened and closed, batting at the corner of Eamon's letter resting beside the clock. I eased the paper out of reach and smiled. "Careful little star. That's our map." Graham's apology came out in pieces. He talked about fear and pride dressed up as practicality and how easy it is to let someone else draw your lines. I listened then, set the boundaries as gently as I could. "You can be here," I said, "but not the way it was. This is my house. I will share it with you if you respect its walls. We'll put it in writing." "Not because I don't love you, because I do." He nodded, eyes wet. "Please," he said, "let me earn this." We drafted a simple agreement on my old laptop room dates chores, a small rent to be paid in work garden, repairs, the unglamorous keeping of a place. He signed with a shaking hand. Under roll, he wrote gardener and laughed through his tears. "You're hiring me, I'm trusting you," I said. "There's a difference." Before sunset, he disappeared to the garage and came back with the framed photo that had once hung over the buffet. Eamon in his work jacket, me in a thrifted dress, both of us too young to know what we were promising. Graham dusted the glass on his sleeve and hung it where it belonged. When he stepped back, the room felt aligned as if a table had stopped wobbling. Evenings found their new rhythm. I cooked for 3 and left the door open to the sound of wind through the aspens. On warm days, Graham carried Alara out to the garden and showed her the first heads of lettuce, the sun on his face the exact shade of the boy who used to chase robins across this yard. Ruthie came by with cuttings and stories, and once out of nowhere, a small bronze plaque that reads, Raven Creek House, 1985. We set it by the porch. One quiet morning, after I settled Alara for a nap, in the bassinet by the rocking chair, I opened my laptop and started a new document. Blueprint of Raven Creek, I typed. Under it, the first line I was once told to leave my own table. That was the day I began to come home. I saved the file, then stood and ran my palm along the yellow wall. It was warm from the sun. When Graham came back from the garden, he sat in Eamon's chair with Alara asleep on his chest. The chair creaked in the same familiar way, and for a heartbeat, I saw the years stack father to son to father. He looked at me, head tilted. "Does it feel different now? It feels like it's breathing," I said. We ate dinner with the windows open. Somewhere down the hill, a dog barked and someone laughed on a porch. The daisies nodded in the wind like a room full of yeses. I washed the last plate and set it in the rack, then turned off the bright lights and left the small lamp glowing gold on the counter. The house settled around us, not silent, not loud, alive. Before bed, I picked up Eamon's letter and read the line I'd been living into without knowing, "Choose peace." I kissed my fingers and touched the edge of the paper, then the photo above the buffet, then the top of Alara's soft head. "We're home," I told the room, and the room, in its old timber way, told me back.